On full screen. There we go.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to our Dream Big Nation podcast. I am so excited to finally be sharing this story of my new friend, Miss Eileen Hornback. Eileen and I think we figured out we actually started chatting way back in January or February, and we're finally getting to record this interview. So I'm super excited. Eileen is the author of Breathe, which is the story of her and her husband and her son, Zach, and his survival story through the power of prayer. This story went viral through 7 countries when she was actually going through it in the thick of it through her blog. And she's finally actually taken some advice from her very good friend, a fellow author, Miss Dee Dee Cox, and got this story out to the public. So we're super excited to have you, Eileen. Welcome.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, hey, let's just get right into it. You shared with me, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners about what happened with Zach, a thumbnail sketch, and, what you were told by the doctors, and then ultimately what ended up happening through his story.
Sure. So my story is every parent's worst nightmare. That phone call you get in the middle of the night saying that your child is in trouble. We received that phone call from Jefferson County Police at about 4 a.m. on July 8, 2005. They told us our son had been in a serious car accident and had been stat flighted to University Hospital, and that we needed to get there right away. When we arrived, we were told that they didn't know what internal injuries he had, but he did have a very serious traumatic brain injury, and they didn't expect him to live. So when we saw him, nothing can prepare you for what you see on a brain injury. I immediately did the only thing I knew how. I started to pray, and it was the 23rd Psalm that I prayed over and over again. He ended up having to have his right bone flap removed so that his brain could swell outside of his head. He was in a coma for quite a while, in neuro ICU at university for 21 days. He underwent multiple surgeries. He had a trach and a G-tube placed, and he struggled to even hold his head up. He couldn't talk. The only thing he could do was give a thumbs up, wiggle his toe, and sometimes stick his tongue out.
Zach was 15 at the time, is that right?
15. It was about 2 months before his 16th birthday.
Okay.
It was between his sophomore and junior year of high school. It was the summer between them.
Right.
So it was, one miracle after another, one answered prayer. We had people all over the world praying for him, and it's not an exaggeration. 7 different countries. Before it was over, it was 11 different countries. And we saw many miracles happen, things that the doctors said were impossible. And finally, I was able to get him into Fraser Rehab. He didn't meet their criteria, but they accepted him anyway. Another thing that the doctor said was going to be impossible. They won't take him. And when he got to Fraser Rehab, he could
And was
do
that
nothing.
because, Eileen, was that because he literally, he was just such a lost cause, quote unquote, lost
He
cause?
was, so brain injuries are graded on a Rancho cognitive scale. And Fraser Rehab wants you to be a 4. My insurance company wanted him to be a 5, which means able to participate in therapy, able to move some on his own, able to respond to all verbal commands, able to communicate. Zach was a Rancho 2. And they said they'll never accept him. They'll never accept him. They told me I needed to look for a nursing home, that that's where he needed to go. As you could imagine, sending your 15-year-old son to a nursing home where I viewed as a place where people go to wait to die was not what I was holding out for. And so we were surrounded by prayer warriors, and we got him into Fraser Rehab. When he got there, he couldn't walk, talk, do nothing. He had right side neglect. So from midline to the right, he didn't recognize that world at all. It didn't exist. So he was literally like this. He wouldn't use his right arm because that side of his body didn't exist to him, or his brain.
Wasn't responding. Yeah.
And he learned at Fraser Rehab how to swallow. That was the first task. How to walk, talk, dress himself, feed himself, brush his teeth, eventually read, do very basic math, tell time. He was an honor roll student, straight A honor roll student. So this was really a big challenge, very different for us. He had a number of things happen at Fraser Rehab that we had to be prayed through. And he was there 66 days. And when he left there, he was singing and dancing.
Wow.
And they were all amazed. His neurosurgeon couldn't believe it. His neuropsychologist says that he's 1 in a million. He actually encouraged me to write the book because he says that people need to be given hope and encouragement in the face of traumatic brain injury. They need to understand that it's not over.
Yeah. Well, and they also, the story is so reminiscent of something that happened in my life. I had a preemie, and the things that you just mentioned, my Cameron was 2 pounds, 14 ounces, and he had to learn to breathe, and he had to learn to swallow, and he had to learn to, all the things that we teach our kiddos, he had to learn, and Zach just had to learn it again, basically, right?
And I say that I got to raise him up as a baby again, the second time.
Yeah.
But it happened really fast.
Right. So let's, you said a couple of things that really struck me the first time we met, because I think a lot of times when parents go through something like this, it can be a very, a thing that brings people together. And then it can also really, couples can struggle. You mentioned something about your husband is a fixer, as a lot of men are. And you almost saw a physical collapse of him at one point. And, I love the analogy of when, one is strong, the other maybe is a little weaker, and you balance one another. Talk to us about that balance, with you and your husband.
Scott was the one that answered the phone call. And, he wakes me up and says, we got to get to the hospital. He was in control, rushing me out. We had to have my sister-in-law, who lived down the street, come down and stay with our 3 young children. He's in control the whole way there. We get in there and he's talking to the doctors, and until he saw him, when they took us back into the emergency room and they pulled that curtain away, Scott realized he couldn't fix it. And he literally banged his fist against the wall and crumbled to the floor weeping. He kind of just lost it. And at that point, I was the one that took control. I was torn between trying to comfort my husband at the same time, trying to pray over Zach. And from that time on, I was the one that signed all the paperwork, um, communicated with the doctors. Now, Scott's job wasn't easy. He had to go home and care for three younger children, uh, two little girls, 6 and 9, and our other son, 12. And, you know, I was always the one as the mom who helped with homework. Now he was having to do that. He was having to try to learn how to put little girls' hair into ponytails and deal with all of their, drama over picking out clothes. And it was a very hard task for him as well. And I have to admit that sometimes I wasn't as patient with him as I should have been. Traumatic brain injury can really tear families apart. And we were warned at Fraser Rehab, they have a neuropsychologist on staff, and that's not just for the patient, it's for the whole family. And she warned us that a large number of couples get divorced when they go through something like this. So that kind of put us on high alert. And, we were stubborn. It wasn't going to happen to us. But
Yeah.
we had definitely had our moments. I would stay, I couldn't sleep there. There was a bed for me, but I couldn't sleep because
Yeah.
they would come in every couple of hours, and then they would do rounds and flash the lights on. And so I would go home. I would arrive there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I was there to see the doctors when they had rounds. And I would stay till about midnight, till Zach was asleep, and I finished updating my blog.
Yeah.
And then when I got home, many times Scott would be waiting up for me. He'd be sitting out on our deck. I could tell that he'd been crying, and he would want to talk to me. And I was tired.
Yeah.
And all I wanted to do was go to bed so I could get some sleep and get up and get back to the hospital. And I frequently brushed him aside. Fortunately, he knew that I was playing a major role in Zach's recovery, and he forgave me. But we did definitely have our moments, for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy. We actually had the same statistics are proven with preemies. Who would even know? And I suppose it would probably go with any parents that are facing, life-threatening potential things with their children. I can just imagine, really whatever happens to parents and thinking about losing our kiddos. So you really played a role of caregiver for Zach. How much do you think his recovery has to do with the advocacy you played in his life and like getting him into Fraser and things like that?
Well, his neuropsychologist describes it as there was no door that I wouldn't bust through to see that he got the care that he needed. But first, I attribute his recovery to prayer and God. He, there was a point when one of the neurosurgeons, I was devastated because I tried to get Zach transferred to Kosair Children's Hospital, and they refused him as a patient. And again, the hospital kept telling me, you need to look for a nursing home. And I was in his room one evening, and had been crying, and one of the neurosurgeons came in, and I was telling him we need to get Zach into Fraser. I had been doing my research, and when you sit in the hospital all the time, I was doing a lot of reading and a lot of research. Some of that was not real beneficial because it scared me to death. But it also made me realize how important it was to be an advocate for him. And so I was crying and explaining to this doctor, we need to get him into Fraser. And he looked at me and spread his arms out, gesturing at Zach, laying in bed, saying, You need to get used to the idea that this is all you're ever going to have. When Zach was doing nothing, and I'll never forget at that moment, I fell on my knees, crying and begged God. And at that point, that's when I totally relinquished control to Him. I said, I know I can't do it. The neurosurgeons can't do it. Honestly, Fraser Rehab can't do it. You are the only one that can make this happen. And once I turned it over to God, I started seeing so many just miraculous things happen. And
Right.
we had so many God moments. Where He spoke to me. I literally heard Him audibly. Wanted to look around to see if anybody else could hear Him.
Right.
Zach had his moments at Fraser Rehab. That's all detailed in the book, where he told us that he met God. At one point, he told us that God showed him the world. So he doesn't remember any of that now. One of the blessings with a traumatic brain injury is they never remember the accident. They don't remember their time in the hospital. He doesn't remember any of his pain. He doesn't remember Fraser Rehab. When he was released from Fraser Rehab, after he went back to University Hospital and had his bone flap put back on, he then went to Fraser as an outpatient for 8 months. That's where he really learned how to read and write again and do, what we consider simple tasks, but more complicated things for him, like the right order of making a sandwich, and cooking. They taught him how to cook. They would take him to the grocery store with a shopping list and have him find these items, and then they would go back to Fraser and he would cook. He never did that after he came home.
I was going to say, he's probably more prepared than any 15-year-old when it comes to that, when he went to college and things like that. So, oh my goodness, I am just marveling at the comment that neurosurgeon made. And how many times do families get that news and they don't fall on their knees and act in faith and just rely on faith, coupled with that advocacy that I'm certain, you really, I think in that moment, put on the true armor of God and went to war. It sounds like, really, because it sounds like there were some control that you were still trying to keep until
Absolutely.
that point, right? Yeah, I know it's so common for us. So I am curious, did Zach ever meet that neurosurgeon that said that?
Absolutely. When Zach came back to University Hospital, when he was released from Fraser to have his bone flap put back on, that neurosurgeon did the procedure. And I'll never forget when we walked, because he walked into the hospital and he saw him and he was just like, what deficits does he have? And he was just blown away. He has since, so he was university is a teaching hospital. So he wasn't the one that removed his skull. That doctor had since moved on and was at another hospital. This doctor was a first-year resident there and was just watching all of the surgeries. And we have since come back and met with him again. And he has a whole totally different opinion of things now.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I was thinking, holy cow, he's just a resident. He's just still learning. Mm-hmm. And this is the comment he made. And I mean, it's not his fault. It's really what he was taught in reality. So
while the book was in editing, we went back, Zach and I together, we went back and interviewed many of the people that were part of his recovery, his neurosurgeons, his PT, OT, speech, nurses, some of his friends that were there every day, because he had multiple visitors every day. And I would just ask them a simple question. I'd say, here's Zach. I'd like to get your perspective of his recovery. And so that doctor got to talk to us and go on video about, what he thought of Zach's recovery. And I have a website, and all of those videos are on my website. And it's really interesting to see the change in after they saw Zach, the change in their opinions of how things should be done. And Zach and I both are first contact volunteers for the Brain Injury Alliance of Kentucky. So when a young person gets a traumatic brain injury, we are frequently called to go talk to the family. And, a doctor can tell you what's going to happen. Nurses can tell you everything's going to be fine. Therapists can say this and that. But when you've been through it, and I can sit down with them and say, I've been right where you are. I know your desperation. I know how traumatizing the whole thing is for the family. And I've been there. And, they believe me because they know that I've been in their shoes. And I always tell them, I was told early on at Fraser Rehab by a very, very smart doctor that ran the whole Fraser program, the brain injury and spinal cord injury program, Dr. Kraft. He told me that they could never figure out why one person with a brain injury would recover and another one with similar background, similar injury wouldn't get better. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago, and now this would be 25 years ago now, that they realized family support is what made the difference. Those patients that had a family member being an advocate, loving them back to the world, those were the patients that got better. And that really encouraged me, that I was doing the right thing, because I frequently would ask for a second opinion. And, I carried this little notebook in my back pocket. And if I thought of a question, I would write it down, because you get about 5 minutes with those doctors, and that's it. And I would write it down. And when I saw them, I would whip that notebook out. And I had all kinds of questions. And, I would see various numbers on his monitor, and I would ask, what is this number? And what do I need it to be? And I'll never forget, early on, one of the doctors asked me, why do you ask so many questions? And I told him, if I didn't ask, I wouldn't know what to pray for. And now you tell me that number, which is a 20, needs to be a 2. I can pray and have all of those people that are praying with us that truly believe in the power of prayer. They could be praying with me. And, before long, I had hospital staff that would come in that would volunteer information for me, because they were all on the blog. I mean, they knew that I was blogging, and I bared my soul in this blog. I told medical information on Zach. I said his white count is up. We don't know why. Please pray that they can figure it out. Today we have Nika as our nurse. She really takes extra care with Zach. So I found out when we got to Fraser that the first thing those neuro ICU nurses at university did when they got to work was log on to the blog to see how Zach was doing at Fraser. And they knew that they were mentioned a lot. So everybody wanted to see, she can mention me.
Oh, that makes me cry. I love that. So this is a wonderful way to transition to how you've gotten this book, this launch of Breathe, because you actually had this blog many, many years ago. This happened in 2005, was it? That
Right.
Zach, so fast forward, all these years, you had this, your dear friend Dee Dee. Dee Dee was a guest on our podcast earlier in the year. Another awesome story. And there was something in her that knew the story had to be told. And
Well, she knew Zach.
mhm,
She knew that I had blogged. She knew that multiple people were encouraging me back then to write a book.
right,
I had stopped blogging. I blogged every day for probably 8 months, and then it would be every couple of days, and then it was once a week. And then after about a year, I did a couple of updates, periodically. But, life moved on, and I stopped blogging, and I put that behind me. And it wasn't until Dee Dee got her first romance novel published that she really started working on me. And she said, "You've got to write this book." And she had been invited to go on the Winter Story Summit, which was a cruise where they had invited 100 authors to be mentored by various professionals. And she had me submit 40,000 words to her publisher. And he called me and he said, "I think you have a great story, and we'd love to have you." So I went on the cruise, and I was mentored by Rosa Salazar. She has written over 10,000 hours of television. She's a screenwriter. And I'll never forget when she sat down with me and they found out, and a couple of the other mentors, they found out that I had blogged. She said, "Oh, now I get it. This reads like a report." And she said, "You need to get in touch with your feelings. We don't care what those numbers are. We don't care what his ICP reading or his white count is. We want to know how those numbers make you feel." So
yeah,
on the way back on the plane, I tore up those 40,000 words, which basically the only thing I did was go on the blog and copy and paste and then kind of blended them together, because I didn't have much time when Dee Dee told me about it to submit this 40,000 words. There was no way I could write from fresh.
right.
And so I tore it up and I started from scratch on the plane, flying back and sitting next to Dee Dee. And Dee Dee had to keep telling all the other passengers why I was crying
Yeah.
because I had to relive it. So
Mhm.
I had taken tons of pictures at university. I've got this photo album that is full of pictures of Zach in the hospital, of
Mhm.
his friends, of what he looked like when I first saw him. And that's another thing God did. I don't, who spoke into me to say, "Document this."
Yeah,
And I started taking pictures, and then the blog. I mean, I had never blogged in my life. And now I was blogging, and that became the bones of my book.
yeah,
Because 15 years later, I went back and I would read the blog and look at the pictures associated with that particular day in the blog and take myself back to that time. So when we got home from the cruise, I started writing in early March. And on the cruise, Rosa made me commit to writing for at least 4 hours every day. She made me commit to a date to release the book and an ending, because I really didn't know how I was going to end it.
yeah, yeah.
So I said that I was going to release the book on October 9th. So this was, late February, we were on the cruise. So I thought that'll give me enough time. October 9th, because that was the 15-year anniversary of when Zach came home from the hospital. So
Wow.
I thought that's going to be my release date.
Yeah,
And then I had to work. I have a full-time job. So I would get home from work. I would lock myself in my office here, and I would write till sometimes 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
Very reminiscent of those days that I spent at university and Fraser Rehab when I would stay
Right.
there. And every night for months, I would cry as I wrote
Mhm.
because literally it took me back there. I got in touch with my emotions, and it was healing. Uh, and I was also able to communicate with Zach during that time. He now lives not far from us in a condo, and I would text him a little portion, I just read about this time, and he always immediately would call me and want to talk about it. And that would even make me pour more emotions into the book. So
Yeah.
the way the book is written, each chapter is a day. So
Okay.
I start from when the phone rings, and then the last day is the day that he comes home from the hospital. Now, it has a decent epilogue to it because he continued on, and we discovered some deficits in as an outpatient that we didn't know he had, and how we worked through those. And of course, I had to be able to tell him that he went back to school. He graduated. He got his driver's license.
Yeah.
He works full time, and got a girlfriend and went to prom and all of those things that I was told he would never do.
Right. Yeah. Well, and also, what I love about this story, Eileen, is how you got through it, progressively. You shared, you kind of, sounds like put it on the bookshelf for a bit of time. And now you're in a different phase of your life. And how often do people have that where there is, there's a sequence of events I feel that God places in our lives. And sometimes we don't even know why we're facing this horrible thing. I just so believe he can use all things for good in some way,
Absolutely.
right? And this is just a brilliant, I can't wait till there's a movie made out of it. There is
Well,
going to
we're
be.
working on that.
I can imagine
I
you
want
have,
a feature film. That was one of the things that was surprising to me when I went on the cruise and I met all of these people. So there was Jeff Arch. He wrote Sleepless in Seattle. Tab Murphy. He wrote Gorillas in the Mist, Tarzan, multiple other shows, and David Kirkpatrick. He was the president of Paramount Studios and then went on to Disney. When they talked to me, they all said they saw it as a movie.
yeah,
And that really encouraged me. So as I wrote it, I was thinking about how it would, play out. I'm not a screenwriter. I won't be writing the screenplay. But I really do hope that we can bring it to the big screen so we can reach a broader audience. Um,
yeah. Well,
because
let's have that be the prayer focus, is for
yes,
the right screenwriter to be revealed, right?
exactly.
Yeah, because I
Because I
agree.
said,
It has to be told to a greater audience.
well, it's sometimes I would call Zach as I was writing a portion. He would say things that would send chills up my spine. That
Hmm.
he would look at it a way that I didn't even look at it. There was one time when he was at Fraser where so he had right side neglect. He wouldn't use his right arm. He didn't recognize the world to the right. So one of the therapies for that was now he was walking at this point and he was just starting to talk. Not a whole lot, but he was starting to talk. And they had him on his stomach on like a big skateboard. And he had to propel himself across the room using both arms. And it would make him use his right arm because if he just used his left arm, he's going to spin it around in circles. And they recognized he was an athlete, so he was very competitive. And so his therapist would always make everything a competition. So on this particular day, he was going to have skateboard races against his physical therapist. So they were getting started, and I was called away to the door to sign some more insurance papers. And when I came back, the mood in the room was completely different. And he wasn't laughing and racing across the room. He was actually sitting in a chair and he was crying. And I walked up and I asked the therapist what happened, and she said everything was fine. He was racing and laughing, and then all of a sudden he just stopped and hung his head and started to weep. And she said that she thought maybe he ran over his fingers, and she checked him out and he was okay. And so I bent down and got to eye level and checked out his hands. And I said, Zach, what's wrong? And he just looked at me with tears rolling down his face and said, God showed me the world. And I'm like, what? And he couldn't explain it. He didn't have the words yet to tell me what it was, but he just said that it wasn't good. He was shaking his head. And we get in the elevator and I questioned him, and he had nothing else to say about it. That night, his dad came to the hospital and wanted to talk to him. And he said, I heard that you talked to God. And Zach said, I met God. And Scott was like, you mean you dreamt that you met God? And Zach said, I met God. And then that was it. So when I was writing the book and I got to that part, now you've got to remember, we left on the cruise from Florida. The first cruise ship had just been quarantined for COVID. And we were getting on a cruise ship. So when we came back, things started to shut down. So I wrote during a pandemic, which was a blessing because I had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
I had no distractions with, all the basketball games and football games were canceled. So I had no distractions. So the night that I wrote about Zach saying that God showed me the world, I'm crying, and I called Zach and I said, wow, I just read this, part in the blog and I'm writing about it. And, you said that everything was bad. And he said, well, God knew when you were going to be writing this, and the world wasn't going to be good then. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Zach. And, we'll never know exactly what God showed him because Zach doesn't remember any of that now. But I truly believe he met God. And I believe God had me writing it during the pandemic and writing an encouraging, inspirational story because our world really needed it.
Needs it. Yep, absolutely. And
in the midst of all this, they need to lean on God because he never changes. It doesn't matter.
And he's, it's interesting. I'm so glad you said that because I feel like right now, those that are, yes, it's a difficult time in our world. Yes, people are losing their jobs and their homes, and yet it's also a time of tremendous ideas and innovation and new businesses being formed. My business started during COVID. You wrote your book. You're sharing it with the world. I mean, there's countless stories like that,
Yeah, I just heard of Zoom before COVID.
Oh my gosh, I was using Zoom, but I mean now I'm like I have Zoom fatigue and Zoom butt. Oh my gosh. Well, this is amazing. I feel like there needs to be, like we need to do a poll of how many stories have been written during COVID, because I think there's so many, people that we all have a story, and yet so many of us, I feel like, we go through a traumatic time in our lives and we never share it. We never share it. Your stories inspired me, Eileen, to share my preemie story. You know, it
Yeah,
really, you're the second person that I've talked to this week that's made me think, man, there's probably some people that could use a little encouragement that have a preemie, you know, and
absolutely. I'm sure that maybe you could start a support group.
you never know what God has planned, right? But I
Exactly.
know He has a big plan for you in your life. And I'm so excited that I get to bring some of that story to our tribe. It's you and I feel like we could talk forever. We're going to have to
Oh,
do this
trust me, I
again
could.
sometime. Maybe we can go on a cruise together sometime. And we're definitely going to be
That would be
part of. Wouldn't that be fun? When I met Dee Dee, I was like, I need to meet you. You're just lovely. And she actually
she's
encouraged
a
me.
hoot.
She is a hoot. She encouraged me to connect with Michael Butler as well. And I'm actually going to be using him for my publisher as well. So you and I are going to be in the same tribe officially.
Yes,
You know,
we
you're
will be
now
red carpet authors together.
exactly. You're now part of our Dream Big Nation tribe, and we're so happy. So, Eileen, share with our audience, you know, where can they, I would love to know the website. People could go and see Zach's story and see that pictorial, you know, debut, and coupled with where can they get the book and all that good stuff.
Well, the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So you just have to Google my name, Eileen Hornback, Eileen with an E, and then it'll pop up. My website is Eileen Hornback, EILEENHORNBACK.weebly.com. And when you go on my website, there's, I think, about 20 videos. And, I would really encourage people to watch the videos and see the perspective from neurosurgeons, his friends, my other children,
Yeah.
um, the nurses and the physical therapist, and just all of the people that were involved in his recovery and their different perspectives. Because his neurosurgeon was really interesting because he spoke to other residents in his, and
Right.
he said, never give up. I know you're tired. I know you work long hours, but that one extra thing could be what makes a difference. And you could end up having an outcome like Zach.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people kind of changed their perspective of brain injury after they saw Zach. And not everyone recovers the way he did. I've been told multiple times he's one in a million. But when we go and meet with other families, I always tell them never give up, never stop working at it. There are stories of people with brain injuries 10 years after injury, they're suddenly able to do something that they haven't been able to do in 10 years.
Yeah.
So we tell them, I don't believe in plateaus. I don't believe that a brain injured person gets that plateau and they're never going to get any better. I tell people when you reach a plateau, that just means you have to change something. Take
Yeah.
the therapy outside, use music, use some other form of therapy to get them over that plateau, because I think that people with a brain injury can continue to recover for many, many years. But probably the biggest thing that I would want people to know is that we underestimate God.
Hmm.
Our prayers are too small, and we think, "Ah, that'll never happen, so I'm not going to ask for that."
Yeah.
God can do immeasurably more than we could ever hope or imagine. And that's what I tell them. Don't stop having faith that God can get you through whatever you're going through, that He can see you through to complete recovery. Zach is not perfect. He wasn't perfect before the accident. We wouldn't trade this Zachary for 10 of the other Zachs.
Right.
And He has some deficits. He's got aphasia, which is a language disorder that makes it difficult to recall the names of common objects. He had, 10, actually probably 12 months of speech therapy where he learned to compensate for that. So he might say in a restaurant, he might ask the waiter for a hand wiper when he wants a napkin.
A napkin, yeah.
Or he might say, "Where's your urination room?"
Right.
And he's looking for the bathroom. You have no problem understanding him. Most people think that he's really funny. They think that he's trying to be funny. So he uses humor to cover it up, but he really can't recall those things. It doesn't impact his life. He also has a field cut, which is like a blind spot, but he's got 20/20 eyesight. It's not in his eyes, it's in his brain. The brain is amazing.
Oh, the brain
His
is so
brain
amazing.
does not perceive what his eyes see in an area about right here, about right where a parked car is when you're driving.
Right.
So he had, and he doesn't see it as a blank spot or a black hole. His brain fills in what should logically be there. So if he's looking at the sky, it fills in more sky. The problem with that is it doesn't change as you're driving. That parked car is continually changing because you're driving. Not if he doesn't. He had 8 months of vision therapy where he learned scanning techniques, and he just, when he drives, he just has to move things out of that field cut area. So he learned to compensate for that. He has retrograde amnesia. He doesn't remember who he was before the accident. He said that he had never had a Christmas. Very hard for a mother who has spent, he turned 16 at Fraser. So when he had his first Christmas, he's 16 years old. So he'd had 16 Christmases now that he didn't remember. But Christmas morning, he's sitting on the floor and he's opening up Christmas presents with all his siblings, when all of a sudden he looks up and he has this really strange expression on his face, and he says, "I got an airsoft gun for Christmas last year."
Right.
Yes. And all of a sudden memories start coming back. Not all of them, but pieces of them. So his neuropsychologist is fascinated with Zach. He's the only patient that he's ever had that has this rare form of retrograde amnesia, where he doesn't remember something unless he experiences it again. So he told me he had never seen the ocean. And I said, "Zach, we've gone to Hilton Head for spring break every year since you were born." His grandparents had a condo there. They would take him during the summer. Said, you've been to the ocean many times." No, never been there. So as you can imagine, after Christmas, how excited we were when spring break came. And we went to Hilton Head, and I took him out. I didn't even unpack the car. I left that all to Scott. I grabbed Zach by the hand. I'm running him out to the ocean, and we're walking along, and I'm just watching him, waiting. And, 10 minutes, and all of a sudden he takes off running. He goes over to where these rocks are, and I catch up with him, and he's like, "We used to sneak over here and smoke cigarettes."
Oh
and
my
I couldn't
gosh.
even be mad at him for that.
Right.
I'm like, yes. But, he played baseball. He can never play baseball. He played basketball and football. He can never play that. So he doesn't have those memories. He looks at pictures of him as a football player and a baseball player, and he doesn't remember it. But the amazing thing is it doesn't bother him.
Right.
He doesn't care. He says that he is actually very happy that this happened, because
oh, sorry, go ahead.
he snuck out of the house. So that's how
That's
he
right.
got his accident.
That's right.
He snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and went for a joyride with an 18-year-old driver and 3 15-year-old girls.
Yeah.
And whoops, lost my video. he says now, looking back, he was doing bad things. And
Yeah.
if this wouldn't have happened, it's interesting because I used to pray every night that as a parent, I would pray that my children would be caught in their disobedience so bad behavior could be corrected. And boy, did God correct
Oh, I
that.
love that. I'm gonna wait, say that again.
I said that my children would be caught in their disobedience so bad behavior could be corrected.
Oh, I
And
love
so
that.
actually, this accident was an answered prayer
Mm-hmm.
because only God knew how much discipline Zach needed.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
he you know, gave him a traumatic brain injury and turned his life around and made him. So we were told that Zach would never have an ordinary life, and he doesn't. He has an extraordinarily grateful life.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
appreciates, he would drag me outside to look at the sunset. He would have me go outside in the snow to see the sunrise. He pointed out flowers. When he first came home, he called me to the window and we had had a freeze and there were some icicles on hanging off a tree in our yard. And he pointed to it. And you got to remember, he has aphasia. So he can't recall the names of things. And he says, "What is that?" And I said, "That's an icicle."
I love
And
it.
he said, "What are those things?" And there were these sun rays coming out of the sky, hitting that icicle and causing it to melt. And he said, "What are those?" And I said, "Those are sun rays." And he
Mm.
said, "It looks like God reaching down and touching that icicle." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And
They're God
he,
rays. Let's
oh, yeah,
rename
he
it.
saw things.
Yeah.
He stopped and smelled the roses. He still today, he appreciates things so much. Most, he's one of the most joyful people you'll ever meet. He
Mm-hmm.
rarely gets angry. If he does, he gets over it quickly. He's got a girlfriend that soon, I hope, becomes his wife.
How
And
old is he now?
he's 31 now.
He's 31.
And
Okay.
she thinks he hung the moon. She adores him. She thinks that his aphasia is hilarious. It doesn't embarrass her that he can't remember. And when
Yeah.
he calls something, makes a funny name for something because he can't recall it, she just thinks it's hilarious. He buys her flowers every week,
I love
always
it.
has fresh flowers.
You need to
He,
let us know when the proposal is.
oh, absolutely.
Eileen, who would you have play him as a
Uh,
character? Do you have
that's
someone in mind?
hard. That's hard. Scott always talks about who's going to play him, and my daughters always say, "Who's going to play me?"
Right, right,
And when Zach starts it, I say, "Hey, we've got to find somebody willing to get their head shaved to play you."
right. Yeah, exactly.
So
Well,
I don't know. God's going to bring those people into the story when it happens.
exactly.
I first
Yeah,
have to. The right screenwriter has to come along, and the right producer. So I just would love to let the world hear our story and know that there is a awesome, powerful, great physician who
yeah.
can heal whatever ails you if you just
Hmm.
turn it over and trust him.
Absolutely. I love that. It's a perfect way to end our conversation. This has been so lovely. I'm so happy that we finally got to connect and hear this. And I am telling you this, I can't wait for the screenplay. And I am going
Thank
to
you.
be starting to
Right,
pray.
so
And
my book.
yes. Oh yes, let's see. Oh, and it's such a lovely cover too. I love
So
that. So
I
be
have an
sure.
international bestseller label.
I love it.
So I
So
got
amazing.
that about the first month the book was out because those videos that we did, I would post one every day leading up to the release of the book. So I generated a whole lot of excitement and interest leading up to it. So there was a lot of people anxious to
Excited
read
about
the
it.
story, and
Yeah,
hope that we
absolutely.
get many other readers and they'll pass it on and get it to the people that really have an issue going. Particularly, we want to talk to families of traumatic brain injury survivors because
Mhm.
we think that we can help them.
You can
We
make a
can
difference.
empathize with them, we can give them a lot of information, and most importantly, we'll pray with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, such a privilege to spend time with you, my dear. And to our Dream Big Nation listeners, I'm so very thankful to be part of your day. Continue to tune in. These stories are bringing inspiration from so many walks of life. And we're so very grateful that you're here with us. Blessings to you in this amazing life journey. And we will see you soon. Bye, Eileen.
Bye. Thank you.